Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, the trailer and a whole lot of discussion for the upcoming Ultimatum leak dropped. In addition to that, there was also a lot of information that was released about Path of Exile 2. That will be its own video, and that will be coming in probably 12 to 15 hours after this one. However, I want to watch the trailer with you first, and give a couple of pauses to give my thoughts on it, and then we'll discuss some of the other changes.
You only live once, Exile.
Yes, the trailer actually starts with a YOLO Exile. That is not a joke. That's how it was done.
Make your choice.
So it's very ritual-like. You're watching this, you're probably thinking, gee, this looks a lot like Ritual. There's a number of big changes to it compared to Ritual that have been discussed, but it definitely looks a lot like it. The first thing is it's a soft barrier. This barrier that you see here, apparently if you stand outside it for 5 seconds, then you fail the encounter. But you can dash through it, get yourself a breather, have a flask, whatever, and then return. I don't know if that 5 seconds is cumulative over the whole encounter. Anyways, this is just a bit of gameplay footage of the Ultimatum fights themselves.
A simple ultimatum. Leave with your life and a meager reward, or risk it all for a chance at
So here you see the way that the game is going to be working here. You can choose to walk away. Think of it in a lot of ways like a game show. You can walk away with a small prize, in this example 482 Parandus coins, or you can risk what you've earned so far in order to go for the bigger prize of an Exalted Orb. Now clearly here you're always going to take the Exalted Orb option, but normally they might be a bit closer in price to each other. And additionally, you'll be able to choose between I think it's always three different mechanics that make the fight harder. So one of these, for instance, that I've seen some information on is monsters gain life. Sorry, monsters accelerate. There's one that causes monsters to gain speed the longer the fight goes. There's one that causes monsters to hit harder. And I think there'll be a number that are similar to the Ritual League encounters. And so here's the fight. And here again, you can see escalating monster speed. All monsters gain more action speed the longer they remain alive. You've already earned this Abyss Jewel. You could walk with it, or you can keep fighting. Chris Wilson said in some of the additional information that I'm not going to include in this, in some of the live stream discussions, that it's expected that experienced players will fail these encounters early on. So during the acts, you'll find that you can escalate it 6 times. He expects that most experienced players won't be able to beat all 6 of the encounters. But then, you can stick around in an area and farm it if you want. And then in maps, you may be able to get 10 encounters. And then just back to back to back to back. And that's what happens if you die. See, there's a clear objective here. And there's your rewards. You'll notice that you got everything. So here the person's got their Exalted Orb that they were expecting, as well as a bunch of little stuff. And this is a terrible loot filter that they're using. So, there's a whole lot of back-to-back-to-back things here. These are important. Reworked rewards core drop pool. There's a couple of changes here. So essentially the core drop pool is things that can drop from anywhere in the game. And there's a number of things here that can't drop from anywhere in the game at the moment. So having a look around, firstly you'll see the new Veiled Chaos Orb. That'll be discussed separately later, but that basically reforges a Veiled item into a new Veiled Rare item. There's things like Parandus coins that aren't part of the core drop pool, talismans. There's also a couple of other things of note here. That's just a common drop anywhere unique. There's scarabs, they can't drop anywhere. There's labyrinth trials, again, can't drop just anywhere in the game. So I'm kind of curious to see if this is actually intended to be a rework to what is in the core drop pool. There's a couple of announced changes so far, the introduction of the Veiled Chaos Orb and the introduction of the Binding Orb as a drop anywhere item, but we'll have to see the exact details later. Vendor recipes. There's a there's a cryptic hint that was given in another piece of information where Chris Wilson shows off vendoring a whole bunch of stuff, all of really obscure stuff all at once. Vendor recipes are just getting a big overhaul. I expect that we'll see that the common vendor recipes that will be announced to players, and I think there's a lot of potential for this to provide ways, especially while leveling, to get mediocre items easier. There's a lot of vendor recipes that are commonly used by experienced players, like the ones to get a one-handed wand with caster damage on it, flat caster damage. These things will probably be something that's reworked a bit here. The Labyrinth is getting a substantial overhaul in this update. So you will see what the enchant is going to be and be able to choose from a multi-selector of 3 options before you apply it to an item, and you will then be able to choose which item you apply it to. What this is going to do is it's going to both make it more accessible to get a particular enchant you desire on a particular obscure helmet, but it's also going to absolutely gut the market for enchanted fossils, which is something I've played around with in the past. I'm certainly not mad about that. It's not a bad change, but it's also going to mean that you're probably going to want to remove enchanted helmets from your loot filter because they're basically going to be rubbish. There's going to be basically any enchant that players want will be available in a trade league in large numbers. And yeah, especially you'll see things like some of the combinations that are really valuable and that actually act as a strong incentive to run the Lord's Labyrinth at the moment are things like getting the Arcane Cloak enchant on Indigon. These will no longer have the premium price tag they do now. Veiled mods overhaul. So when an item drops with a veiled mod and you unveil it, that veiled mod will be stronger than what you can craft on it. So if you have an item drop that's say, I don't know, a weapon that's got 3 veiled mod, that's got a veiled mod and 3 random mods, then the veiled mod on it has the potential to be much better than the normal ones are now. This will be interesting. I think we might see people starting to treat veiled mods maybe almost like an incursion mod. They might be something that you want to try and find the right starting item and then finish it off with other crafting methods. I just got to see them in practice to be sure on that, but this looks like a pretty significant change. Additionally, there's a new Chaos Orb, a Veiled Chaos Orb, which when applied to a veiled item, rerolls it as a new veiled item. The easiest way to get these will be by running syndicate content with Ashling in your syndicate, but you will also be able to get them as a drop anywhere currency item. I expect they'll be pretty rare as a drop anywhere currency item, like maybe as rare as Orbs of Annulment, which are something like 2.5 times rarer than Exalted Orbs, but we will have to see that. Catalysts. 2 new catalysts are being added. One of them was quality. Of course they're quality. One of them is critical modifiers, and I think the other one was speed modifiers. And they mentioned that these are going to be quite rare. So they're going to be rarer than the Fertile Catalyst tier. These could be very, 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 very strong. Abyss Jewels, no real information given here, except that there's a couple of new Abyss uniques that deal with them. But I get a feeling that there may be some increased strength in Abyss Jewels. I'm kind of not sure why they did this. Like a few leagues ago, they nerfed them because they were just so dominant back then. Maybe they think they won't be dominant anymore, but I certainly think this means that any belt that's not a Stygian Vice or not a Crystal belt isn't worth picking up at the moment. Essences, there's a couple of changes to these, and the biggest one is that the Screaming tier, so that's the 3rd from the top, no longer requires the application of a Scouring Orb first. So that's going to be a big improvement for for gearing up in early mapping. You're not going to need as many Scouring Orbs. Betrayal. So there is a 4th tier of rewards that's being added from the syndicate that you can only get by running Katarina. When you run Katarina, you will have the when you run Katarina, you'll get the benefits of all of your entire board with a +1 level to them. I still think that given the enormous opportunity cost of running Katarina, this is going to be a bad deal. The other thing that's changing is that the breach blessings will be able to be used to further upgrade breach stones. So if you have say a Tull's blessing, you can apply that to a Tull's enriched breach stone to turn it into a Tull's pure breach stone, or a Tull's charge to turn it into a Tull's enriched, or a Tull's basic breach stone to turn it into a Tull's charge breach stone. So it's a 3-step upgrade, and this is going to mean that it that fled below level 3 is going to be useful for the first time ever. Rewards for Blight first. The changes that are these are actually really significant changes in Blight. So let's undo that, zip past it. Firstly, there is a new tier of oil being added. What this does not work like the normal oils. What it does is it allows you to modify corrupted items with an anoint. So if you've got an anointed item, if you've got, say, a Great Wolf Talisman, so the Rigwald's Talisman, or if you've got something else along those lines, a talisman or just a corrupted piece of jewelry that's dropped, maybe you got a +1 curse implicit amulet that's got quite good mods on it, then you can now use this new oil to allow you to anoint those items. Those are going to be very rare, apparently. I will have to see how rare they are, but even if they're 10 times as rare as a gold oil, I think they'll be pretty accessible in a trade league. Maybe not on your first amulet, but I think you will start seeing people doing things like 2 implicit corrupting Zerfi's Heart, and then if and only if it hits, then you can then go and stick an anoint on it. Breach changes, the only one that was mentioned is the ability that I mentioned in the Betrayal section, the ability to upgrade breach stones via the blessings. Parandus, we have the Kadiro, the Harvest Craft that melts a unique item into Kadiro coins is going away, or at least it's getting substantially nerfed, and that means that Parandus chests will be made better to compensate for that. So rather than Harvest being the best way to get Parandus coins, it'll be Parandus content. Kind of got to see this in practice. I think this is probably going to end up making Parandus a little bit weaker than it is now, but we'll have to see. Incursion, you can now finally turn your Temple of Atzoatl into a tradable item, either to put it in your stash and run it later, or to trade it to other players. Additionally, there's a number of changes to the Vaal Omnitech drops. The Incursion rares will be affected by the maps and the tiers that you've got in the rooms in your temple. Interested to see how this plays out in practice, and I think also some of the non-upgraded Incursion uniques have been improved. The upgraded ones pretty much all hold up well, except for Story of the Vaal and Fate of the Vaal. That one hasn't held up well over the years, so hopefully that gets a little bit of a buff. But the other ones are all looking pretty solid at the moment. At least most of them have some niche use at least. Delve is getting sweeping changes. Essentially, the rewards at lower tier delving, so what I'd term casual delving, are being improved. The rewards at ultra deep delving are being nerfed, and we don't have any hard numbers on that. Atlas base types mentioned, there's a bunch of new ones. We'll have to find out what they are. This was the most interesting thing though. Act boss drops. Act boss drops have been terrible in Path of Exile, really ever since the 3.0 expansion. Before 3.0, there was certainly a section of the player base that liked going and killing. No, actually, I think it may have even been. No, it was then. People used to go and kill Dominus in merciless difficulty back when I started playing the game. That was back when there were only 3 acts, and you ran through the 3 acts, then the 3 acts again, then the 3 acts again, and then you got access to maps. Merciless Dominus with a quantity color was a popular thing to do in a group. That sort of completely dropped off the radar in the 3.0 era. And it'll be interesting to see just how much they've changed this. There's a few things in tech, in the game's tech recently that have added what they term valuable item drops. I'll be interesting to see if these bosses now have those. Adsri first. So we've just jumped past it to the incubators. Atsuri is getting, well, firstly, her sacrificial garbs are getting a slight upgrade. They're getting an implicit that you get +1 to the level of all Val skill gems. They're actually pretty significant for things like Val Fireball. However, I do think there's probably better options for most situations. The only situation in which I really see this being used is in conjunction with builds that use Pledge of Hands. So they're pretty starved on the number of. Well, actually, no. Pledge of Hands doesn't really. Actually, no. I don't see it being used. Let's correct that. There's 3 new Atsuri themed uniques though. 1 that will drop from Atsuri and 2 from Uber Atsuri. So we'll get to see those. Incubators, there's a couple of new incubators being changed. We'll discuss those a bit more later. Incubators are in a really weird spot, and I kind of think that they need a transformation of identity. I think incubators would be much better if they were set up to have better awards than they do now, and if they were changed so that you can only equip 1 at a time on your character rather than having 11, and just make them more impactful. So, you know, instead of using a skittering incubator and getting 1 scarab, you would get 5, but it would be a while until you were able to claim them. Anyway, that's sort of not what they're doing. They're not overhauling how they work. They're just adding a couple of new ones, as far as I can see. So Bestiary, they are finally getting rid of the split beast, imprint beast, magic item duplicating factories. Those are gone, and actually split beasts in general are being nerfed considerably. Essentially, once an item is split, it's tagged as split, both copies of it, and can't be split further. So that's going to mean that all of those divination cards that give 6-link items are going to be good again. There's going to be a lot more chasing after 6 links early in a league, because it's not just going to come down to the first person to get a 6-link with 3 or 4 white sockets astral plate, just absolutely dominating the market there. And there's a bunch of skills going off. And here is possibly that's Doriani, but we don't really know. Okay, so that's the trailer. There's a bunch of stuff in it, and it's worth having another look at it slowly by yourself without me sort of jumping in the way. Let's go through all the things that are on the official Path of Exile Ultimatum site, though, and discuss a little bit more that's known about some of these things. So firstly, Path of Exile Ultimatum is just mentioning you must undertake Trials of Chaos and choose whether to risk it all for ultimate power. April expansion contains the Ultimatum League, 8 new skill and support gems, improvements to Val skills, an overhaul to past league reward systems, dozens of new items, and much more. We've also just released a new trailer and gameplay showcase for Path of Exile 2. Once more, that's a separate video. That'll be another 12 hours or so. So the concept of the Trials of Chaos is an interesting one. This is basically where you are fighting against challenges that are set by some Val entity that just names himself Chaos. Now, I kind of think this might be Doriani, but we'll have to figure that out. The Trial Master seeks to discover challengers who are willing to make immense sacrifices in the pursuit of power. As you survive each of his challenges, will you risk it all and accept the next ultimatum? So here's the basic concept of the ultimatum content, basically outlined again. So you are essentially, you receive your rewards for fighting things once, and then you'll have the ability to add in to basically risk it on a sort of double or nothing basis. So you go from having 1 item to then getting both of these items. Then once you've got those 2, you can risk those 2 items for 3 items. Once you've got the 3, you can risk the 3 for 4, and so on and so forth. Each time you're effectively adding a new mod to the encounter. So here's one example of that, Totem of Costly Might. Invulnerable Totem will appear that imbues both allies and enemies with speed and powerful physical damage benefits, but causes them to suffer physical damage over time. So this is an obstruction in the arena that makes the arena fight harder, and will make the encounter more challenging overall. You can choose a different one. If you can't deal with the Totem of Costly Might, you can choose one of the other ones instead. And then here's just a screenshot showing the encounter. So, as I say, double or nothing is the theme of the league, and there are inscribed ultimatums which will drop in maps. These are essentially an itemized, I guess you could call them like The leagues may be equivalent of Grand Heist. They are their own map, and you'll put them in your map device as normal, and they will contain a special challenge. You will need to offer up an item as sacrifice for these, for you to be able to do these, and if you succeed, it will be doubled. So for example, Inscribed Ultimatum, challenge, stand in the stone circles, area level 80, requires a sacrifice of an Exalted Orb. Reward doubles sacrifice currency. And then you can see here all of the different challenges that are associated with it. So Choking Miasma, Totem of Costly Prophecy, Costly Potency, Ruin, Escalating Monster Speed, and so on and so forth. So I'm assuming that this means you need to then do 8 or 9 of these, 7 of these challenges it looks like. So the 20% increased monster damage, 40% more monster life is just a stat of the encounter. So you need to do all 7 of these challenges. If you fail any of them, you lose your Exalt. If you succeed at all 7 of them, then you will receive 2 Exalts back. Here we have an Inscribed Ultimatum where your challenge is to defeat waves of enemies, and this is area level 79. You must sacrifice 4 copies of the Nurse Divination card, and you will receive, if you can beat all of the challenges, all 9 of them, then you will receive your 4 nurses back plus another 4. And then here is one that converts one unique into another. So you'll be anteing up a Whispering Ice, and if you're successful, you will receive a Void Battery. So some interesting stuff here. These Inscribed Ultimatums are tradable, and I think that we'll find a lot of players will probably focus on trading for these early on. GGG mentioned that you can expect to see perhaps one of these every 20 zones that you do. Now that doesn't mean that you get one that is specifically an Exalted Orb one every 20 zones, just that you will get an Inscribed Ultimatum once per 20 zones, typically. So I think that's pretty similar to the rarity of Blueprints, although we'll have to see that in practice. Now, there's a couple of new unique items. First, these are all really weird and wonderful. So let's just start with the Glimpse of Chaos Vaal Mask. This one's interesting in that it can be modified while corrupted, and it has a number of truly unique Vaal implicits, like nearby enemies are crushed. It also has the increased life, reduced fire resistance, increased mana and reduced cold resistance, increased energy shield and reduced lightning resistance, and then your chaos resistance is 0. So this is a kind of tricky item to use. I think people will play around with this a lot. Additionally, because it can be modified while corrupted, you should just always assume that this has 30 quality, because you can always give it 30 quality once you make it awesome from other mods. Very similar to the Cirrus gloves in that regard. I don't know what happens in terms of whether Vaaling it can brick it. I assume it can. And then that's going to be interesting in that you'll wind up with a Vaal Mask that might be able to have some corruptions you otherwise can't get, because apparently this item has its own corruption pool. So we'll have to see what happens there. Then we have, I think that's Moixel's Machination. That is an absolute monster of an item to name. And this has Corrupted Soul, Divine Flesh, Eternal Youth, Everlasting Sacrifice, which is new, Immortal Ambition, and Vaal Pact. This is just going to be impossible to parse how good this item is. This is something we're going to have to test out in practice. Everlasting Sacrifice, we don't know what that does yet, but all of the rest of these are some of the newer keystones that have been added to the tree. Well, Vaal Pact's not new. That's been around a long time. But this is a really interesting unique item, and I think this is going to be something that could be quite interesting to see to implicit corrupted. So we'll have to play around with that and see how it goes. The Vaal Reliquary is being introduced. So Reliquary keys are something that have only existed in 2 past leagues. The first one was the Legacy League, which had one type of Reliquary key that could drop legacy versions of unique items. The second one was the Delve League, in which it was the only way to get certain past league exclusive items. The Delve era ones essentially functioned as just a time-worn incubator, except that it had no weighting. So you had the same chance of getting a Headhunter from it, or a Xerfes Heart, which was equally valuable back then, as you did for getting, say, a Talisaur's Sign. Whereas with a time-worn incubator, you're much more likely to see a Talisaur's Sign. The new reliquary keys, though, they will give a Val-themed item with no weighting. So you've got the chance of getting Atsuri's Reflection, Doriani's Delusion, Zerfi's Heart. There's also a bunch of weaker ones as well. They also have this amazingly cool look to them. This is just the same as a normal Atsuri's Reflection. It has no different mods to what a normal Atsuri's Reflection has. It's just that it looks cool. So these will be a lot of fun to play around with. Chris Wilson did say that these are going to be very rare. Because Zerfi's Heart, for instance, is an extraordinarily rare item, that means that you can expect this to be something that's the rarity of the Val Reliquary Key will be balanced around this. So it's the rarest Reliquary Key ever added. The reason that the Legacy League ones were quite a bit more common was because overwhelmingly they gave you bad items like a Legacy Moon Sorrow. There's a bunch of new skill and support gems. These are going to need their own video each to discuss because there's just so much to discuss in them. Atsuri's Reign is being overhauled as well, and this is looking really, really good. I don't know how rare this is going to be, but this is something that you can get by corrupting a Crimson Jewel of any type now. Reward improvements is an interesting thing. There's just a whole bunch of changes to the way that rewards come about in the game. Orbs of Binding come about in the core game. This is something that's been long requested. These things are so bad at endgame, but so good when you're leveling that it'll be great to see them in hopefully in the Axe. Veiled Chaos Orbs we've already mentioned. And the Iolite Ring is essentially a steel ring or an opal ring for chaos damage builds. Now, the Lord's Labyrinth, we've already mentioned the changes that are happening to the way that the enchants come about. So when you complete the Lord's Labyrinth, you will see what the enchants are. You'll have 3 to choose from, and you can choose choose which helmet to put in after knowing what the enchant's going to be. That's going to be really quite tricky for the purposes of people who do lab running. I think lab running will probably die off as a result of this. The Emperor's Jewels that used to be available for the fastest daily Labyrinth runs are gone. Well, they're being replaced by a new drop system, which is just they're going to be very rare drops for completing the lab. And additionally, there are new Labyrinth-specific unique items, and you can also consume an offering to the goddess in the map device to open a random trial. So that's going to make it faster to get your Labyrinth flagging. In fact, if you're determined the first time you find a trial, you can just keep feeding those offerings to the goddess into the map device, opening up new trials, and you can get into the final labyrinth very, very quickly if your character is strong enough for it. We've already mentioned the Katarina changes. There's also a new unique. With the changes to veiled items, I think Paradoxia and this new Cane of Kulamak will be much better than they are now. Now, we have a number of changes to past league rewards. Probably the most significant one, and it's not really mentioned here, is that most past league exclusive items are being made global drops. So this means that something like Headhunter no longer requires you to be in a map that has the Nemesis flag active from the Zana map device in order to drop. It can drop from any monster. It'll be extremely rare. And additionally, you can chance it. I believe you can chance it in any map. This is still to be confirmed. Essence of Delirium has been changed, as you can see here. Decay, for instance, has had a 40% buff on it, which still probably isn't enough for it to be useful, but still, at least it's something a little bit different. And there's a few other changes, and I expect that a lot of these essences will be changed. There are Abyss Scarabs being added, which will add additional abysses, and abysses will spawn additional monsters, so that's going to be something that'll be a lot of fun to run in conjunction with the Atlas passives that do the same thing. And then there's a couple of new Murderous Eye Jewel, a couple of unique items that add additional effects based upon the number of jewels you have active. Here's all the changes that are coming up to the Atzoatl, but the big thing is, of course, this Chronicle of Atzoatl. Now, we have Incubator rewards are being modernized. Don't know what that means yet. Blighted Incubators. Now, the actual number of monsters will be a lot higher than 442. I think that the website is defaulting to an item level 1-1, and the number of monsters you need to kill scales aggressively with the monster level. So, Incubator Blight item, I'm assuming that this is going to be something that could drop out of a Blight chest in Heist. Morphing incubators, so metamorph items. Again, expect that this will be something that could drop from a metamorph chest, which means broadly speaking, it's been rubbish. But now with the new catalyst being added, maybe they will be rare enough that morphing incubators will be good. Maddening incubators will be interesting. This may be a very big source of item level 84 cluster jewels, which are sort of always in high demand. And also some simulacrum splinters. Maybe it'll drop a full simulacrum if you're lucky. Unstable catalysts are the critical ones. These are just going to be amazing. And in a lot of ways, these will be something that will allow you to target craft specific things as well. Because if you use an Exalted Orb on an item that's got 20% a 20% critical quality on it, then you are considerably more likely to get a mod that is critical tagged. Blight Scarabs here, so Blight encounters contain an additional Blight boss will be interesting, so you can get 2 Blight bosses in a normal map. Now, Blighted Burial Chambers map is listed here because there is a new implicit. Maps item quantity modifiers also affect Blight chest count at a 20% of value. So what this means is that if you were to run this map with 50% quantity on it from various sources, then this is going to mean that you will get 10% increased Blight chests. And here's that tainted oil I was mentioning about before that allows you to put a enchant onto a corrupted item. Additionally, you can now corrupt blighted maps, which is something that's like it wasn't worth doing in the past, but you couldn't do it either. Here's the Atsuri changes. So new item from Atsuri. Given that this is level 68 required, I'm assuming this comes from normal Atsuri. And given that this is 75, well, this is currently an Uber Atsuri drop. I don't think this is enough to make Atsuri Splendid good, but we'll have to just see. And then there's a little bit of discussion of Path of Exile 2 that comes up, which again we'll skip for another video. In terms of other things that haven't been discussed, there's going to be a reasonably unexpected nerf to talismans. So anyways, talismans are going back to being useless again in terms of as item drops. I think that's probably a little bit over the top, but they're no longer going to roll with good mods on them, which means that basically talismans, you can probably take them off your loot filter again. Ritual is coming as a core game mechanic, but in 8% of maps. I don't think this is the right way to do it, but anyways, it's what they're doing. There will be additional effects that link to it inside some of the various Atlas zones as well. Anyways, I think I'll leave it there for the moment. I will discuss the Path of Exile 2 stuff in another video. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I hope you have a good one.